Very good to all of you. I'm very grateful to Professor Vijayalakshmi Ravindranath for inviting me here to be part of this very, very stimulating meeting. I'm a clinical neurologist, by default, research. I know we've heard the burden of dementia in India, but to put the more personal perspective, as a neurologist, when people went from house to house in mountainous Kashmir, as recently as 2 years ago, to quote from their studies, patients with dementia were not found. Quite similar, in fact, remarkably similar to what was said in Africa. No subject with dementia was found. So it's a disease that has come upon us in the last 20 years. As a neurologist, I have not really seen that many patients with dementia, and it's something that our generation is seeing. The steep curve that you saw on Professor Jonet's slide in the morning, India, it just goes up like that. I think we are bearing the burden of patients with dementia in low and income countries. Being a very common disease, the way the disease manifests is also quite different. It depends upon the kind of natural environment we all grow up in. So we don't know how to wear a sari. For the people who've come from other countries, it's not very easy to see. I can't handle a sari and a talk at the same time. Women draw this very beautiful rangoli in front of their houses as an auspicious sign every day. They complex foods, and these are our cultures, and we speak languages, and these are the processes that break down when we develop dementia. What we've learned over the last 10 years is that it's a very complex disorder. There are many studies that we're learning from. This is an example to quote from the Rush Religious Order study, a longitudinal study that examined the brains of healthy people, and it's clear that the range of clinical problems that you can have with another range of pathologies, it's not just Alzheimer's, it could be a range of pathologies found which could manifest as mild cognitive decline or dementia, risk factors. You've heard this wonderful Professor Seshadri in the morning. Genetic factors play a role, vascular factors play a role, you've heard from the previous talk, but what's also emerging is that several life course variables to modify the relationship between clinical features, manifestation, and pathology. So today, spend a little time on the life course perspective of this. It's a concept that's emerging, explains a part of the disease, but that will be the focus. And there is a amount of evidence from epidemiological studies, from imaging studies. The more educated you are, the later dementia, lesser is the risk of developing dementia. If you have engaged in complex occupations, it seems to delay the onset of dementia, in spite of pathology, complex leisure activities, and physical activity. So this data from the ADNI and that birth cohort, but essentially these are studies emerging biomarkers, CSF amyloid abnormality, volumes, and cognition. So the upper panel is a group of people with low cognitive reserve as measured by the National American Reading Test, which is thought an indirect evidence of your educational and occupational history, and people with a high cognitive reserve. You see that the curve shifted to the right. Here on the x-axis, people with normal cognition, mild cognitive impairment, and dementia, suggesting that if you have, as a group, if there was higher cognitive reserve for the same amount of pathology, they develop manifested effects of disease much later. This is a study done in Aberdeen, and while the negative effect of white matter changes, total cerebral volume, or cognition was negative, the effect of education was positive, countering the effects of pathology. Having said that education, occupation, lifestyles impact manifestation of, and maybe even protective or be a risk. We know that literacy rates across the world vary widely. This is Buchaya. He is a patient with vascular dementia that came to our clinic and developed this, which we derived so much from Mary Ganguly's HMSC, and he's an illiterate milk who owns 5 stores, lives in a house with 4 sons and daughter-in-law and 10 children. There was no caregiver stress. And he came very fast at a stage when there was profound cognitive impairment, but no caregiver stress at all, and very good care. These are grandchildren who you can see are so interested in. We hope that this literacy map will change, and that might be an intervention that might actually reduce the burden of dementia in countries like us. Like I said, what you do in your life and occupation influences cognition. There is so much occupational heterogeneity across the proportion of people in agriculture, industry and service industries are very different, and this is something that might impact dementia expression. There's an interesting map I just found how it tells us about the games that we play in different parts of India. There's the snakes and ladder for India here. So there's a lot of cultural. How does all this impact the burden? Does it have anything to do with the variability, with the burden in different parts of the world? And then coming to the main topic, in this, is there a role for bilingualism? There was this one in 2010 by Professor Ellen Baylis, and in his memory clinic cohort, she was able to demonstrate that people who spoke more than had a later age at onset of dementia in comparison to those who knew one language. That was one study. It was the first study that was done. But the trend view on bilingualism has been that bilinguals were a special population. They were viewed as being unusual, being damaged, like children with language disorders, and English were thought to be the models of study cognition. And most research in cognition really focused on monolingual English people. But that has changed. Understanding second language learning is now considered to be the top 125 questions to be answered in the next 25 years of research, and there's so much more happening now in bilingualism research across the world. And most of us, more than half of the population is multilingual, and it varies from country to country. In some countries it's more, and in some countries it's less, but it's there in almost all countries. So this is a slide that is news to people outside India in predominantly monolingual countries, but something that we all take for granted is very special. The ability to speak when you know more than one language, and activating the other language is thought to give you a cognitive advantage over those that can speak only one language. And this is something we do all the time, whether in the market, whether at home, speaking to 4 or 5 people, each with a different language profile, and we're constantly switching from one language to the other. And that a life of resolving cross-language competition offers a range of positive consequences for cognition and our brain networks are arranged. This is a science task, there are several tasks that demonstrate in bilinguals a better ability of cognitive control, inhibiting responses. So the test here says stimulus red, press the button on the left. If you see green, press the button on the right. But sometimes the red stimulus is located on the side of the button, red sometimes on the opposite side, and this is called congruent and incongruent triad. And this is thought to be a test of cognitive control, inhibitory control, and there is evidence that bilinguals, especially the older ones, do better on this task in comparison to monolinguals. But it's really not all that simple. The first study that was done in French Canada was done on a group of immigrants. So it was thought to be one of the ways in which one could explain this. Migrants were healthier, they had some kind of protection, some other lifestyle reasons, and they just happened to be bilingual. They had a later age at onset of dementia. Another thing, this is from Montreal, if you spoke 2 languages, it didn't seem to protect, but if 3 or 4 languages, there was some protection. A study from, in the United States of America, among Spanish-English bilingual, there was no beneficial effect at all. So in high educated people, but in the lower educated people, it seemed to have some beneficial effect. So there were several confounding variables, immigration, education, and languages you knew that seemed to explain this effect. Brings us to then we thought, wondered if we could explore this in our context, since we are a very bilingual country. We speak many languages. We learn 3 languages in school. This is how our grocery list. We have different categories for we use different languages for different semantic categories. They're constantly, and we had this cohort of patients of dementia were seen in the memory clinic in Hyderabad where incidentally, when we started the study in 2007, we had collected information about whether they were bilingual, and this was done because, and in the number of languages and the languages they knew, because we needed to do neuropsychological tests that were done in the language that they were comfortable with. So so you need to use tests in the language that the patient is most comfortable with, and so since you speak more than, you have Telugu people, Tamil, Kannada people, all our cities have people who speak more than language. We have tests for each of these languages, literates and illiterates. So when we looked at language use patterns in our population, this is a language use questionnaire that we devised, and we administered it to people, and we found that at homes, in their intimate domains, they were mostly speaking that it could be Urdu or Telugu, but in informal domains there was more English, and in formal domains there was a real mix of languages with much more English, confirming that they were actually using a lot of these languages. So our question was, is multilingualism associated with the onset of dementia, and what is its relationship with other confounding? So we had 648 dementia patients that were seen. We records retrospectively, and we defined age at onset at the first clinical symptom suggestive of dementia was noted by a reliable family. The standard definition of multilingualism we use is Mohanty's definition. He is a gentleman who worked extensively on multilingualism in India, and the best definition that he could come up with relevant to our context, because we can't all read and write the languages we speak. Multilinguals were defined as persons with an ability to meet communicative demands in the normal functioning in 2 or more languages in the interaction with speakers of any or all of these languages. So we had speakers of 1, 2, 3, 4 languages. We found that the mean age at onset of dementia among monolinguals was 6.1 years and 65.6 years among multilinguals. Since there are different subtypes of dementia, we can classify people into, so there's most of the work is Alzheimer's disease, but there are several other kinds of dementia, vascular dementia to stroke, frontotemporal dementia, which is a disorder of behavior, and we observed that the age at onset of whether they had Alzheimer's disease, frontotemporal dementia, or dementia was later among bilinguals. There were several confounding factors. You can see bilinguals were mostly men, more often educated, more often lived in urban areas, so and engaging in complex skilled occupations more often than monolingual. But when we did the gender linear model, we were able to demonstrate that bilingualism had an independent effect on the age at onset with no significant interaction with other variables. It didn't seem to matter whether you knew 2 or more languages, and it didn't seem to matter whether you knew Hindi or Urdu or Telugu. This was a meeting held in Hyderabad. Actually, it all started for us. You can recognize many researchers here in the room, actually, who were in Hyderabad, and that's when we had a multilingualism and dementia, and different see since then. And then this study we published, and since education ought to be a confounding factor, we looked at illiterates. people who couldn't read and write at all, and the age at onset among multilinguals was higher there. It didn't take more than 2 weeks to get our first, and points made were one, it's a clinic-based study, yes, and that there was only one disease group that we dealt with, and to establish a kind of an associated causative and not just by chance, we needed to have less. And there were several confounding factors, like they lived in villages, so many of them, and that could be the reason why, and all very valid points which need to be factored in. So what we did was, we looked at only the rural people, and even among the rural population, bilinguals seem to have a later age at onset of dementia. So where are we now since then? There have been 4 studies done in the United States of America, 4 negative for the beneficial effect of bilingualism among Spanish-English bilinguals, but all 4 located in the United States of America. One thing, so that we have negative studies which have not shown protective effect. And then, how does one define bilingualism? It's not black or white, you're not bilingual or monolingual. There are many different variables. How well do you know each of these languages? How much do you use them? When did you learn them? How long has your brain had the practice using 2 different languages? So these are again variables that have to be factored into studies to investigate this relationship. And while bilingualism is thought to improve cognitive control, response inhibition, which is a form of a frontal lobe function we call executive functions. So there is some healthy bilinguals that there is a beneficial effect. But in the same group of healthy bilinguals, there is some evidence that it's actually a disadvantage to linguistic processing when you know 2 languages. But there is again evidence that it improves perspective. You're understanding another person's perspective, another frontal lobe function. But the semantic system, the concept, dog, what we know dog is the same whether you use the word dog or nai. So the semantic system is thought to be unification, but this is a kind of an overview of what we understand about what bilingualism does to cognitive processes. So as I mentioned, controversies are there from mixed in dementia studies, variable definitions of multilingualism, is it a reverse causality, and does it affect all cognitive processes, only few? There are 4 European studies from Wales, from Belgium, and from Luxembourg, and there's a both cohorts from Scotland, all of which that demonstrated a protective effect in healthy people or patients with dementia among multilinguals. So how does this happen? Is there something that's changed in the brain and bilinguals that it can objectively demonstrate to us that they are in some way different from monolingual and they protects the brain? So this is one imaging study that demonstrates the anterior cingulate cortex matter volume is more among bilinguals in comparison to monolinguals. And studies where they've looked at atrophy in monolinguals and bilinguals scan and found that bilinguals for the same level of cognitive impairment have more levels of atrophy, again suggesting that it provides cognitive reserve. This is a very nice study which Professor Ansaldo has done. You will hear about it and about her theory of aging. So I think she should tell you that. But essentially what the group studied was on the Simon when they imaged monolinguals and bilinguals, monolinguals recruited, there was activation in the front areas, whereas in bilinguals there was no activation of areas, but there was activation in the inferior parietal lobules, first. And this was thought to be because they were not needing to recruit the frontal lobes to perform conflict resolution task, because they've been doing it all their lives, and it's therefore not necessary to that part of the brain which monolinguals need to recruit. So there is like this coming in, that brain activity, brain volumes, white matter integrity is all preserved or differently preserved in bilinguals. So I'll spend the next 5 minutes telling you a little bit about what we did, therefore, in this background of confounding factors. And so we looked at 3 different pathologies. One was mild cognitive impairment, an early stage of dementia, frontotemporal dementia, and a different disease where there is an insult stroke. So you all know that Alzheimer's disease is preceded by a very mild memory problems for many years. So in the clinic we had about 1,100 patients. Among them, 103 had mild cognitive impairment. We looked at the onset, diagnosis, and at onset, and the age was delayed was later among multilingual to monolinguals. So this is again the clinical neurologist, and I don't know how many neurologists, but there is this dementia syndrome, frontotemporal dementia. It's a disorder where 4 areas of the brain atrophy. Unlike Alzheimer's disease where it's predominant memory, here you have either problems behavior, so they are very disinhibited, perseverant, socially inappropriate, and they have atrophy in the frontal and dorsolateral frontal areas. There's another kind of dementia where you have predominantly language disturbance. You have problems with speaking, comprehending, and those are called progressive aphasia. And there are 2 kinds of frontotemporal dementia where it's not really cognitive, but it's more motor, so they can't very well, they can't do skilled motor activities very well, called protrusive supranuclear palsy and corticobasal degeneration. So here you have one clinical syndrome with different phenotypes, and you have bilingualism, which is thought to affect cognition differently. So we've looked at the age at onset of dementia among these 4 subtypes of dementia. We had 194 patients. In the previous study, the age at onset of dementia among as a group was later among multilinguals. Severe variant FTD, the kind of frontotemporal dementia where behavioral problems, less memory problems, was a delay in age at onset. Non-fluent aphasia and semantic dementia, the last variants of FTD, we did not demonstrate a significant difference in the age at onset of dementia, nor was there a significant difference in the motor variants of FTD. Basically suggests that it protects sometimes it doesn't seem to protect. And the differential effect of bilingualism suggested an advantage to control at the expense of a more vulnerable language. So finally we looked at stroke because it's a rate of conditions. We have a stroke, we see lots of stroke patients, and a wealth of literature about who are these stroke patients who develop dementia problems after stroke, and several factors have been proposed. The older you are, and then if you have many vascular risk factors, if the stroke is located on the left side, if you have many strokes, if you have coexistent degenerative pathology and myelology, it seems to kind of make increase the post-stroke cognitive impairment, and we wondered if bilingualism has anything to do with this post-stroke cognitive impairment. And we had 541 stroke patients. So we divided them into patients with dementia, mild cognitive impairment, and strokes with normal cognition. And you can see here, 22% of monolinguals had normal cognition, 45% of monolinguals had normal cognition. And the reverse was noticed in vascular mild cognitive impairment with dementia. So this is actually an extension of this study. More results have been published in stroke, which will come sometime this week. So in 3 different, clinically different diseases, there seemed to be some association of bilingualism in reducing the cognitive impairment. To fit into the rest of our life course variables. How does it in any way affect, or how does education influence our risk? How does our occupation influence our risk? These are all studies, and everything Professor Mary Ganguly said in the morning applied to the patients of these studies. These are just of where we must do our research in the future. And with fully understanding the limitations of clinic-based study, we found that educated people had a later age at onset of dementia. 4.5 years among educated people and 60 years illiterate people. But when we looked at all the factors, it was multilingualism, living in the rural areas, and association with vascular risk factors that seem to be independently associated with a later onset of dementia. We know it protects, so we looked at why was it that it didn't up the final small data. We looked at illiterates, and we found that again a very small number. We have some illiterates are engaged in skilled activities, not necessarily manual labor, but more skilled weavers and potters. And there was again a slight indication people who engaged in some kind of a complex skilled activity during their life, they were the people who who had a later age at onset of dementia. So these are some questions that have been raised in clinic studies in our context. The minor is probably going to address some of these issues. We need to do longitudinal studies. We are very grateful to the Trust and Professor Vijay Lakshmi who have given us an opportunity to start the study. So it's a study on longitudinal aging, and here we plan to recruit healthy people from the community. This is 1 year in its since its initiation. We've started the study, and all currently available aging biomarkers will be performed. We are looking at the neuropsychological functioning and their life course variables, be it activity, nutrition, education, stress, personality, and multilingualism. So about 10 life course variables. These questionnaires have been now validated in our population. So we believe that if we start patients, we started imaging as well, we're doing volumetric studies with them, and over 5 years we will look for relations between cognitive status and any of these markers and interaction between life variables and these markers to maybe understand is in our environment that is putting us at a risk for dementia. It could be malnutrition or low birth weight. It could be some. It's probably more complex than any one factor, and I think each country or each community will have some set of factors that protect it or make it vulnerable for the risk of dementia. So the topic of bilingualism is best interpreted in the context of mental activity, neuroplasticity, and cognitive, and along with other variables from genes to environment to influence dementia expression. We periodically get articles written that kind of say it's not really, bilingualism is not protected. So we wrote this bilingualism, dementia, tale of many ways, why we need to move beyond the Western world. And talking about genetic studies, I think that's one thing in India we've not been able to do all that much. Still listening to Mary Ganguly's study, both related cognition and apolipoprotein E, which doesn't say much about us. We recently did the C9orf mutation in frontal dementia, which is thought to be one of the most common mutations seen in European populations, but we were able to find this mutation in our population. So suggesting that our genes, we have to do genetic studies in our population to understand which are those genes that put us at a risk. So to conclude, a wide variability in cognitive indicators exists across the world: education, occupation, social activities, everything. And this is likely to influence heterogeneity of dementia burden, expression, and outcomes across the world. Thank you.
So I was thinking that maybe knowing 2 languages or 3 languages or 4 languages, maybe it doesn't really matter, because what might matter more is what's the element of surprise in your life. That's what I would say. So what I mean by that is that when I'm dealing with only, so I'm a professional in one particular field and I have a certain routine which I follow. So there's not much of a surprise to my life in the whole day because it's what I do. But but might be happening, it might be just relation is, since you're speaking more than 2 languages, 3 languages, means dealing with different set of people, so means there is more probability that it will be a little surprising, for that sometime what you expected happen, sometime it happen. So that way you are more at task time rather than just going through the day. So that way, that's why somebody say that, okay, language knowing help, because maybe it's not the language I say, but you go through every day, how many challenges you have.
I think it's a very good observation. And, so far, people have investigated the cognitive advantage to bilingualism. Advantages have been demonstrated in executive functioning. I think Professor Ansaldo they've done a lot of work on that. As I mentioned, it does seem to enhance theory of mind and perspective. So perspective is one thing that improves when you interact with different groups of people. So that is one possibility. We have to study it's just an epiphenomenon, or whether it's actually directly associated with improving cognitive reserve. Current evidence seems to suggest that it is.
Like what he said, maybe any activity which stimulates the mind, like Churuku, they say that even mathematical ability also which generally reduces the dementia cases. So is it mind activity or stimulation to the mind and the brain activity which is a cause for this?
In more colloquial terms, say use it or lose it. So there is some evidence that if we are involved with cognitively stimulating activities, it does seem to alter the way brain pathology works.
Thank you very much for this very interesting presentation. Thanks a lot. I think the Westerners here would agree that the way we drive on the roads and the way we speak may have some protective effects on the brain. Head injuries that we may suffer. Thank you very much for this interesting talk.